Hi, I'm Vidhi Chheda and today we are going to continue with the revenue topic. This is the second part wherein we are going to talk about the step number 1, which is one of the essentials to recognize revenue. In the first part, we saw there were 5 steps and today we are going to cover in details step number 1. The seller is going to record revenue and he is going to start with step number 1 by identifying the contract. Unless there is an arrangement between the buyer and the seller, we cannot record revenue. The seller has to record revenue, but primarily he will have to first identify is there an arrangement between him and the buyer. So the step number 1 is extremely important. If there is no contract between the seller and the buyer, we cannot recognize revenue. Okay. So in step number 1, we are going to understand what do you mean by identifying the contract. There should be two parties. Obviously, one should be the seller, and other would be the buyer. So there should be a seller who's willing to sell. There should be a buyer who's willing to buy. The seller and buyer, there should be a contract. Now, contract means agreement for the same thing in the same sense. Okay, when I use the word contract, I mean both the parties are agreeing to the same terms and conditions. Both the parties have the same understanding of the goods, the payment terms, and everything. This contract can be in any form. It can be in writing, it can be oral, it can be any business practice. But yes, there should be agreement between the buyer and the seller. This terms and agreements which are agreed between the two parties should make the parties binding to the contract, and it will also be enforceable by law. So this agreement should be making both the parties binding to the contract, and it should be enforceable to both the parties, where the seller is obligated to provide goods or services and the buyer is obligated to fulfill the monetary terms. Now, when we talk about the contract, we need to identify whether the agreement gives clarity on these 5 aspects. The buyer and the seller should be very clear about these 5 points when they are entering into contract. The first step is that both the parties should agree, should approve the terms of the contract. The buyer should agree for the same goods and services, the seller should agree for the same goods and services. There should be approval of both the parties. Once both the parties approve the terms and conditions, they should be committed to fulfill their respective promises. Once they promise, they become binding, and both the parties enter into a contract where they will have to fulfill their promises committed to each other. Second point that you must identify in the contract is that once they are committed to fulfill their rights and obligations, they are also entitled to receive the benefits. Their rights are established to ensure that the other party fulfills their promise. The seller is obligated to provide goods or service. In return, the buyer will have to pay monetary consideration. Similarly, if the buyer is making monetary consideration, he has established the right to receive goods and services. So both the parties are committed to fulfill their promise, and both the parties are also committed to make the monetary consideration. Coming to the third point, where once the promises are identified, once the rights are established, there should be clarity about the payment terms. The seller can have his own payment terms and the buyer can have his own understanding of the payment terms. There could be on the spot cash payment, so cash on delivery or on the spot cash payment. There could be credit facilities given to the customer, or there could be some arrangement of advance. Whatever it is, the contract should give you clarity about what will be the payment terms. The contract should give you clarity about the entire transaction and understanding and the terms and conditions. Then there should be a commercial substance. Now, when I say commercial substance, there should be an economical understanding. Whatever is the transaction, it should give economic consequences. Example, your mom cooks food for you. When your mom cooks food for you, she does it out of sheer love and affection. Here, there is no commercial substance. But when you go to the restaurant and you are served food and for which you pay the bill, there is an economic consequence. So the contract should result into monetary consequences, which means it should have commercial substance. And fifth and the most important part, it should be probable, there should be probability, the collectability is certain, which means that you are selling goods to the buyer and the buyer is going to make payments after 3 months. You can record the revenue now, even though the money will be received after 3 months. You can record the revenue now because there is somewhere surety or there is certainty that the buyer is definitely going to make the payments in future. So, unless and until there is a doubt that the buyer may not pay, we can always record revenue. So if we are confident that the buyer even in future will ensure, will surely make the payments, we can record the revenue today. We did not wait for that date when the payment will actually be received. So these are some important 5 steps that should be identified in a contract. There should be a contract between the two parties. This is given in step number 1. Let's quickly summarize. What should be the contract giving you clarity on? The contract should give you clarity about the parties have approved the terms and conditions. Thereafter, they are committed to fulfill their promises. Thereafter, what are the rights they have established? What are the benefits they are entitled to? What would be the payment terms? There should be commercial substance, which means it should result into monetary consequences. And finally, there should be certainty that whenever the money will be received from the buyer. We will continue with the next step in the next lecture. Till then, you can revise the points. You can revise the first lecture which was recorded. Thank you.